بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم. So building upon the talk that Dr. Tariq Ramadan just gave us, beautifully describing to us what it means to be a Muslim American, what it means to be a Muslim living in a culture that may have thoughts, beliefs, and ideas that go against what we hold to be true. I want to talk a little bit about why today, here in the US, as American Muslims, we are living in a cultural diaspora. We're living in a time where we feel like our identities are unanchored, where we often feel like we're being attacked almost in different ways. And why do we feel this sense of displacement? We feel this sense of displacement because we are living in a society that is trying to culturalize our faith, that is trying to take our deen, our Islam, and turn it into a cultural association rather than a way of life. How? When we look at just a few days ago, the Christmas holiday came and went. And today we see so many bumper stickers and posters and billboards even that will say things such as, "Keep the Christ in Christmas." Where has the Christ gone? Today we see holidays like Christmas and Easter and Hanukkah turned into cultural icons, representative not of a faith, not of a connection to God, not of obedience to a higher authority, but to an obedience to the people, to a satisfaction of the nafs, to a feeding of the ego and the self, which defies all the principles of any monotheistic religion. Today, we look at our own faith, our own Islam, and we recognize its universality that Dr. Ramadan spoke about so beautifully. We recognize that if we look around this room, we will see Muslims who come from all different cultures, from all different backgrounds, yet each and every Muslim who comes with this different cultural ethnicity or affiliation will pray in the same way, will stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that the reason for creation, or as the French say, the raison d'être, the reason for being is to worship Allah. And that's why, try as they may, our society will not culturalize Islam unless we let them. And this is why it is our important burden, our important job, our important duty to ensure that our faith is not culturalized, to ensure that our faith remains steadfast, and that our focus is on the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's easy to slip because the word insan comes from the root word of the nisyan, the forgetting. We were created as humans who err. We were created as humans to forget. And it becomes easy sometimes when the world that surrounds us keeps pushing us towards individualism. It becomes easy sometimes when those who live their lives looking as if they have reached that pinnacle that Dr. Ramadan spoke about in the pursuit of happiness, for all intents and purposes, they look like they found it, and they found it outside of faith. But if we give into that individualism, if we give into that constant self-satisfaction and the feeding of the nafs, then we are allowing our faith to become culturalized. We are allowing our faith to lose its meaning, that we were not created but to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We live in a selfie world. And I know if we enter any of the youth conference topics right now, we will find a lot of the focus is on the impact of Facebook, the focus on taking selfies, the focus on pleasing the self, on the nafs. What's happened to Ummat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? There was a time when the Sahaba entered the room and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam had tears streaming down his face, so much so that they said his beard was wet. And so the Sahaba asked him, "For what do you cry?" And so the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said he feared the day when his ummah, instead of saying ummati, 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 would say nafsi, nafsi, nafsi. And we've come upon that time today when we look around our communities and we see single mothers struggling to raise their children with no one there to help them. When we look around our community and we see youth that are struggling with problems like drug addictions and illicit relationships and friends who are bad influences, and there is no one there to help them. Instead of rallying around those who need us within our communities, we have succumbed to the individual aspect of this culture, and we shy away. We're afraid that this may touch our family too. And so in losing that connection to the ummah, we have also lost a part of who we are as Muslims. And so many times it is tied to our ego. It's tied to that riya, that showing off, that kibriya, that wanting to be better and above than those around us. So how do we change that culture? How do we get to that point where we can be the influencers? When we look at Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he saw that all around him were following the wrong path, when he saw that the people of his town and his own father were going in the wrong direction, what did he do? He didn't leave the town and say, "I will go away from here because it's a bad place." He did not say, "I have nothing to do with this, I won't get involved." No. He spoke to the people in a language they could understand. He understood where they were coming from, and he reached out to them in a way they could comprehend. So instead of simply saying, "Do not bow down to these idols," he broke the idols and hung the axe on the largest of the idols and told them when they came to ask, "Go ask your idol who broke them." And in that way they responded to say, "How can we? This idol does not speak." And the rational part of the human should immediately come into play. As Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam answered and said, "And yet you pray to these idols and take them as your God." Today in our societies, we may not have the fear of idol worshiping, the IDOL, but we have another type of worshiping that is occurring. It's an idol worshiping in the sense of the word IDLE, a worshiping of all that makes us idol, all that occupies our minds unnecessarily, all that pulls us away from the deen and towards a culturalization of our faith, rather than a closer connection to the Creator. When we look around today, we see our youngsters, our young girls being socialized by an agenda that tries to teach them to be like the Disney princesses. And we see this agenda changing with the culture and the time. Whereas Cinderella once was the pinnacle that people should strive to be like, this beautiful woman who cooks and cleans and eventually finds her prince and lives happily ever after. Again, that pursuit of happiness that does not relate to what we define as happiness as Muslims. And as the culture changed, we see Cinderella and the concept of the ideal woman changing with it. And suddenly, the princess ideal becomes like Ariel, a woman who gives up who she is to become someone else for the one she loves. And then that too changes to today's paradigm, to today's discussion of what a young woman is encouraged to look up to as an ideal. And we see princesses like the one in Frozen who tells us to let it go, who tells us that as women we no longer need a man in our life. And the feminist dialogue that we could talk about for quite some time is just one tip of the iceberg of what our children are being exposed to, of what our youth are growing up with. And we need to bring our faith back. We need to give our young girls role models that they can truly look up to. Do they know the strength of Sittina Khadija radiallahu anha? Do they know about the companions? Have you talked to them about Nusayba? Have you talked to them about Sittina Aisha radiallahu anha? These are the role models that we should have. And our boys need to grow up knowing what it means to be a leader. Do they know the story of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu? Do they know the history that is so rich with examples? When we look at our Islamic history, we see that in a span of a few short years, the world was changed by our faith. The world was changed by the Muslims. Yet today, are we changing the world, or is the world changing us? There was an interesting analogy that circulated for some time on social media, and it talked about the individual being like the carrot, the egg, or the coffee bean. If you place a carrot into a boiling pot of water, although it begins as a very hard object, the circumstances, the boiling water change it and make it soft and malleable. If you take an egg and place it in the boiling water, externally the shell is hard, but it becomes soft internally by the circumstances. But if you take a coffee bean and place that in the same boiling water, it does not change. It changes the water around it. And so we today have to be like that coffee bean. We have that ability, we have that desire, and we have to have that willingness to make the change. We cannot look to people like Eminem and Beyonce and Kim Kardashian as role models for our youth. You know, today there's the group 5 Sauce and other bands that our children look up to as people who are encouraging. Yet these are not permanent. Our deen, our faith has lasted for how many thousands of years? When I was growing up, the popular group was New Kids on the Block. And today, of course, we know they're Old Kids on the Block. And so all of these popular figures that shape the culture that we currently live in are impermanent. They're not here to last. So rather than having our children emulate these images with dropping their pants down low and singing songs filled with vulgarities, teach them the beauty of our deen. Teach them the language of the Quran so that their tongue can be trained to speak beautiful words. In society today, we know again the impact that our Islam can have. We see popular figures like Rihanna wearing a hijab with a leather suit. What does this mean? Does it mean our culture is accepting our way of dress? Does it mean that popular culture is saying, yes, hijab is a good thing, let's all wear it? No. It is a taking from our faith and trying to culturalize it. It is taking even what we wear for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making it a type of dress to please the people. And when we buy into this dialogue, when we buy into this discussion and this type of viewing our faith as something that is done to please the people, we lose again our purpose. We lose the reason why we are here. So we need to take ourselves back to that golden age of Islam. We need to take ourselves back to being that change. If we find ourselves praying in 5-minute intervals between commercials, then we need to ask ourselves about our priorities. You will only know what you really love If you look at what you think about all the time, what occupies your mind? Is it thoughts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is it thoughts of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Or is it thoughts of the selfie you just took that you posted on Facebook and you keep checking every 2 seconds to see how many likes it has received? Ask yourself, what have I done today to fulfill my purpose? What have I done today to act upon my purpose of worshiping the Creator? And ask yourself today, who defines you? Who do you allow to define you? Many of you may be familiar with the podcast called Serial that talks about a young man in the 90s who was immersed in the culture around him. He would lead salah in the masajid, he would fast, he would pray, he would be with his parents, yet he also lived that identity of the cultural diaspora that we spoke about earlier. And so even as he would lead salah in the masjid, soon after he would go and smoke pot. After breaking his fast, he would hang out with his friend who was a drug dealer. And this story is not just one. It's one of a million that is happening to our youth today. Because so many of our youth have lost that differentiation, have lost what it means to be a Muslim, what it means to have the Quran as your character. And we as an ummah have failed them because we've turned a blind eye to the culturalization of our faith. And instead we choose to see only the rosy picture. MashaAllah, he comes to the masjid. MashaAllah, he is fasting. But who are his friends? To know a person, you must know their friends. Who is this individual hanging out with? Understand why our youth are being pulled away and how we can pull them back. Because we are not just Muslim. We are Muslim Americans. There is no other back home. This is our home. And we need to start acting like this is our home. We need to start believing that this is our home. And we need to start making changes, not only in our home, but in ourselves as well. أقول قولي هذا واستغفركم وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم.